For those of us who came of age listening to the smooth sounds of the late 80s and early 90s, the era of New Jack Swing holds a special kind of nostalgia. We often find ourselves scrolling, asking, whatever happened to them? Those one-hit wonders who lit up the charts for a moment, then seemed to vanish into thin air. Did they simply walk away from the fame, or were they erased? This is the story of Wayman Anderson, known to the world as Suave. He was a promising R&B singer from Los Angeles, whose talent earned him a stunning 7-album, multi-million-dollar deal with Capitol Records. He was living the American dream. But his story didn't end with a gold record. It crashed headfirst into a nightmare of betrayal, drugs, and institutional injustice. Suave was convicted of first-degree murder and arson, receiving a life sentence based on the shaky testimonies of drug addicts. The shocking truth is that the evidence suggested he was framed for murder. But the narrative gets darker still, because this man, wrongfully imprisoned, holds key information connecting him to the shadowy world of Death Row Records and the unsolved case of the Tupac and Biggie murder. This is the price of silence, and a truth Hollywood has never dared to touch. Wayman Anderson, the man who would be known as Suave, was born in the heart of Los Angeles, California, on February 22, 1966. His early life was not paved with red carpets. He was raised in a gang-infested neighborhood, primarily by his great-grandmother. For many young black men in LA during that era, the streets offered a constant temptation towards danger, but for Wayman, there was an escape route embedded in his very bloodline, music. His father, Wayman Anderson Sr., was not just any musician, he was a member of the legendary R&B group GQ. Their smooth, soulful sound, epitomized by the hit, I Do Love You, was part of the soundtrack of a generation. This musical heritage was a powerful, undeniable force in young Wayman's life. It was a clear demonstration that success and a path out of the neighborhood were possible, even if the reality outside his door suggested otherwise. His earliest performances took place not in clubs, but in the church choir, a common proving ground for so many great black singers. This foundation of gospel soul quickly blended with the rising tides of contemporary urban music. By the time he hit his teens, Suave was heavily influenced by the vibrant sound of R&B, standing right at the start of what would become the influential New Jack Swing era. His big break wasn't orchestrated by a major label executive, it was earned on pure audacity and talent. Attending a New Edition concert, one of the biggest groups of the time, he somehow found himself brought onto the stage to sing with them. That moment, bathed in the spotlight and the roar of the crowd, solidified his path. It brought him the crucial attention he needed, putting him firmly on the radar of several major record labels. The dream materialized quickly and grandly. By the time he was just 19 years old, Wayman Anderson had secured a monumental 7-album, multi-million-dollar record deal with Capitol Records. This wasn't just a record deal, it was a passport, a validation, and a multi-year promise of a career that promised to reshape his life completely. He was poised to be the next big R&B singer. His debut album, I'm Your Playmate, released in 1988, launched him onto the national stage. The album climbed the charts, reaching number 101 on the Billboard 200 and number 26 on the Billboard R&B Albums chart, a solid start for a new artist in a highly competitive market. His first single, a soulful remake of The Temptations' classic hit, My Girl, became his signature. It resonated widely, peaking impressively at number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100 and securing the number 3 spot on Billboard's Hot Black Singles chart. This success was all the more remarkable considering the landscape of the time. Suave was competing directly against heavyweights, Bobby Brown, whose debut album Don't Be Cruel was massive, Michael Jackson, who had just released the iconic Bad album, and Keith Sweat, a pioneer of the new jack swing sound. To achieve a top 20 pop hit and a top 3 R&B hit amidst that caliber of competition spoke volumes about his raw star power and talent. However, the rapid ascent soon met an equally swift gravity. The momentum from his first single proved difficult to sustain. His second single, Shake Your Body, peaked lower, at number 22 on the Hot Black Singles chart. By 1991, his second album, To the Max, featuring the single Rock Your Boots, struggled significantly, failing to make any substantial noise on the charts. It was a cruel awakening. The high-stakes environment of the music industry, where a massive multi-album deal could become a heavy burden, demanded continuous success. When the music stopped connecting with the masses, everything else in Wayman's life seemed to follow suit, spiraling rapidly downward. The failure of the second album marked the beginning of a dark, steep decline that would trade in the promise of Cadillacs and platinum plaques for the cold reality of the streets. The dream had stalled, and with it, the foundation of the young star's life began to crumble. He started looking for quick fixes in dark places. When the spotlight faded, the music industry dream that had lifted Wayman Anderson, the R&B singer known as Suave, began to turn toxic. The weight of his unfulfilled potential, coupled with the fast life and easy access that came with fleeting fame, proved too much to handle. The man who had once graced the Billboard charts soon sought solace, and income, on a far more perilous stage. The swift decline saw him move from battling giants like Michael Jackson and Bobby Brown on the radio to fighting personal demons in the shadows. He started using drugs, a destructive habit that quickly escalated into hustling and selling them. He was labeled, in the parlance of the streets, as a kingpin. It was a jarring, tragic transformation. The smooth-talking artist became the very figure his upbringing had warned him about. The inevitable reckoning arrived on January 29, 1994. Police descended upon his home in Calabasas and arrested him. He wasn't charged with drug dealing. The charge was far heavier and more permanent: arson and first-degree murder of a homeless man. The story the prosecutors presented to the jury was chilling, painting Suave as a cold-blooded villain. The incident dated back to September 18, 1993. Witnesses, drug addicts frequenting a crack house, claimed a tall, ponytail-wearing drug dealer burst through the door, looking for two specific addicts named Punch and One Arm Will, who owed him money. When he couldn't find them, the dealer allegedly retrieved gasoline, splashed it throughout the residence, crumpled up newspaper, and lit the place on fire. 3 other drug addicts managed to escape the burning building, but one man, Robert Wellington, was tragically burned to death. Weeks later, the police tracked down One Arm Will. When they arrested him, he was carrying a single piece of evidence that would shatter Suave's life, a business card with a phone number written on the back. Investigators traced the number, and it was registered to Wayman Anderson, or Suave. From there, the case against the former star snowballed. Police showed the addicts, the witnesses who escaped the fire, pictures of Suave, and they identified him as the arsonist. Furthermore, they noted that the black Ford Explorer seen fleeing the scene of the crime near the College of USC matched the description of Suave's vehicle. The witnesses even claimed they saw him holding a gun and a grenade, demanding to know the whereabouts of Punch and One Arm Will. This testimony created the portrait of a ruthless criminal, capable of killing a man over money, the polar opposite of the velvet voice heard on the radio. Based on this web of circumstantial evidence and the desperate testimony of drug users, the police moved in. Suave was arrested in front of his wife and child. The headlines wrote the end of his music career, replacing the narrative of a successful R&B singer with the label of a brutal killer. The dream of a second act was extinguished under the weight of an accusation that seemed suspiciously thin, but devastatingly effective. He was utterly and completely framed for murder. The question remained, was he set up by a rival, or was the tragedy simply a confluence of bad choices and flawed police work? The transition from the bright lights of an R&B singer's career to the suffocating confines of a jail cell was too abrupt, too violent for Wayman Anderson, the man once known as Suave. The initial shock, coupled with the immediate withdrawal from the drugs he had been using, led to a severe mental health crisis. As a diabetic and a man who suffered from epilepsy, the stress and the lack of proper care exacerbated his pre-existing medical conditions. He suffered a nervous breakdown and was transferred to a mental state hospital. There, he was officially deemed unfit to stand trial. Yet, even within the walls of a psychiatric facility, the desire for freedom was palpable. In a moment of desperate clarity, or perhaps delusion, Suave attempted a brazen escape. He tricked the night shift staff by arranging sheets in his bed to mimic a sleeping body. He was free for 2 weeks, a brief, terrifying taste of liberty before he was recaptured at his sister's house. This flight, however brief, only served to reinforce the prosecution's narrative of a guilty man avoiding justice. When the case finally went to trial, the deck was heavily stacked against him. His defense lawyer attempted to poke holes in the prosecution's flimsy evidence. Suave's barber testified that the singer never wore his hair in a ponytail, a direct contradiction to the witness's primary description of the drug dealer. Furthermore, there was absolutely no fingerprint, DNA, or any other form of physical evidence linking Suave to the scene of the arson and murder. On the stand, Suave was brutally honest about his life choices. He confessed to the judge and the jury that he had made terrible mistakes. He admitted to being a former gang member, selling drugs, using drugs, carrying guns, and even cheating on his wife. He laid bare his flaws, his human failings, hoping that his honesty would convey his innocence in this specific, heinous crime. He insisted that his business manager at the time had access to his cars and phones, suggesting an easy explanation for the circumstantial evidence. But his honesty was deemed a weakness, and the defense's efforts were not enough to counter the relentless narrative built by the prosecution. The final, damning piece of evidence was the simplest and most easily manipulated, the cell phone records. A call made on the phone registered in Suave's name was relayed by a cell tower near the crime scene around the time of the arson. The prosecutor seized on this, relying almost entirely on the testimonies of the crackheads, who had positively identified him. The jury was successfully convinced that Suave was a ruthless drug dealer who had killed a man near the College of USC over money. He was sentenced to life without parole. His promising life was effectively over. The aftermath of the trial was a period of immediate and bitter realization for Suave. Believing he had been poorly represented, or worse, betrayed, he fired his defense attorney. He came to believe that this lawyer was not working in his interest, but had been sent by someone else to silence him. The person he suspected of setting him up was none other than Kiffedy, the uncle of Orlando Anderson, the man widely suspected of being the triggerman in the Tupac and Biggie murder cases. In 2002, Suave found a new lawyer and filed for an appeal, armed with compelling new evidence that his previous attorney had failed to present. He had credit card receipts proving he was out of state, in Mississippi visiting his sister, on the actual day of the killing. Even a minister from Mississippi vouched for his presence at church that day. Furthermore, the two crackheads who had testified against him recanted their stories, providing sworn statements that the police had pressured them into identifying Suave as the arsonist. The new lawyer presented an airtight case demonstrating that Suave was unequivocally framed for murder. Yet, in a staggering display of judicial denial, the judge rejected the appeal, ruling that the alibis and all the new evidence were fake and fraudulent. The prison gates remained firmly shut. The rejection of Suave's appeal in 2002 was not just the closing of a door, it was the start of a far more sinister chapter that placed the forgotten R&B singer at the intersection of American crime and celebrity culture. While confined and supposedly irrelevant, Wayman Anderson's story became intertwined with the biggest unsolved mystery in the history of hip-hop, the Tupac and Biggie murder cases. His connection wasn't forged through a confession, but through the complexity of his past network. Suave had deep roots in the music industry, knowing Suge Knight from when Knight was a bodyguard for Bobby Brown. He knew Puffy and Andre Harrell from his time with Uptown Records. But the key link was Kiffedy, the man whose family he suspected of setting him up. The pivotal event that brought the FBI to his prison cell was the discovery of a cell phone, registered in Suave's name, found during a federal raid on the Death Row Records office. The records of that phone showed calls were made on the night of Biggie's death, after the infamous Vibe party at the Peterson Automotive Museum. The FBI saw an opportunity. They presented Suave with a stark offer. If he would testify and tell the world that Suge Knight was the one who killed Biggie Smalls, they would use their power to get him out of prison. If he refused, he would rot there forever. In his deposition, Suave took the deal. He claimed that Suge Knight, along with two former LAPD cops, David Mack and Rafael Perez, were the ones responsible for Biggie's assassination. These were the same suspects named by the late Detective Russell Poole, who died mysteriously of a heart attack while pursuing the case. He was also offered money by Biggie's lawyer and family, who were actively pursuing a massive wrongful death lawsuit against the LAPD at the time. However, the truth is as elusive as the killer. Shortly after the deposition, Suave dramatically recanted his entire statement, claiming he had lied and made it all up. The reason? He had received direct threats from Suge Knight and others, leading him to fear for his life and the safety of his family. He even accused journalist Chuck Phillips of being the intermediary, delivering the message from Suge. This shifting testimony highlights the profound injustice of his situation. Here was a man, unequivocally framed for murder in his own case, now being manipulated and threatened from behind bars by the very criminal elements he was supposed to expose. The system that failed to grant him justice for his own innocence was now demanding he risk his life for an impossible truth, only to then leave him exposed to the consequences of his testimony. The tangled narrative, in which an R&B singer's rise and fall becomes a central puzzle piece in the Tupac and Biggie murder, reflects a deeper American tragedy, where fame, crime, and systemic disregard for evidence create a perpetual shadow of doubt and unpunished wrongdoing. The story of Suave is a profound American tragedy, the swift fall of an aspiring R&B singer swallowed whole by the very system designed to protect him. Today, Wayman Anderson remains incarcerated, a forgotten man battling fourth-stage throat cancer and confined to a wheelchair. He is fighting for his life, while simultaneously fighting for the truth of a life stolen. Yet, his spirit remains unbroken. His final stand for justice rests on the simple fact that the two primary witnesses who put him away have given sworn statements admitting they lied under police pressure. The evidence of an alibi was there, the DNA was missing, and the core testimonies were retracted. Suave was unequivocally framed for murder. His continued imprisonment is a scar on the justice system, a chilling example of how the vulnerable, especially those who fall from fame, can be easily sacrificed. He is no longer asking for forgiveness for his past mistakes, he is demanding accountability for the government's unforgivable error. His legacy is not just the hit, My Girl, but the chilling, untold chapter he inhabits within the most complicated crime saga of our time. He remains a key, if unreliable, witness to the dark dealings of Death Row Records and the Tupac and Biggie murder cases. He remains a man whose suffering could have exposed a far greater web of corruption. In the end, some stories do not conclude with a neat moral, but with a plea for dignity. Call to action. His music, the voice of the promising young R&B singer, has recently been reissued and is now available on streaming platforms. Support for his art is a form of support for his fight. He is now pleading for donations to secure a new legal team, a final chance to prove his innocence before his health fails. We read every comment. If you believe in justice, or if this story reminds you of the deep-seated flaws in the system, share it below. Let us know your thoughts on the dark entanglement between fame, crime, and the courts. Suave is not just an old name on a cassette tape. He is a man who saw the truth behind the curtains of the Tupac and Biggie murder and was punished for the possibility of telling it. He found his voice on the stage, and he is fighting to use his last breath to speak the truth from the silence of his cell.